The polished marble floors of Tianheng Corporation reflected a cold, unforgiving light, mirroring the glacial demeanor of its new general manager. Lin Zwenong stalked down the hallway, her sensible flat squeaking in protest with every angry step. She clutched a slim portfolio containing the proposal he had barely glanced at before dismissing. Her proposal, the culmination of a year's work developing a new line of craft fruit liquors, rooted in ancient fermentation techniques she personally revived. Unmarketable, lacks premium appeal, she muttered under her breath, mimicking the deep, dismissive tone that had made her blood boil. Who does he think he is, Mr. Joe? The great ice sculptor. Just because he wears a $1,000 suit doesn't mean he knows the first thing about heritage distillation. Arrogant, condescending, probably thinks by dew grows on trees. Her tirade gained momentum. She neared the elevators, her voice rising from a whisper to a venomous hiss. And that look he gave me, like I was something he'd scraped off his custom-made Italian shoe. I bet he drinks nothing but imported mineral water and calls it a flavor journey. What a? Are you done? The voice was low, calm, and directly behind her. It cut through her anger like a shard of ice. Lin Zwenong froze, her heart seizing in her chest. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying it was a hallucination, a figment of her rage. Slowly, she turned. Zhou Heng stood there, impeccably dressed in the same tailored charcoal suit from the meeting, his expression unreadable. He hadn't just heard a snippet. The faint, mocking curve of his lips told her he'd heard every single word. Mortification washed over her in a hot, suffocating wave. She could only stare, her mouth hanging slightly open, words failing her for the first time that day. He held her gaze for a beat longer, a silent confirmation of her humiliation, before turning and walking away without another word. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and he was gone, leaving Lin Zwenong rooted to the spot, her face burning with a shame so profound it felt like a physical brand. Days later, the sting of that encounter still fresh, Lin Zwenong sought refuge at a hot spring resort for a brewers' conference. She hoped the steam and anonymity would soothe her frayed nerves. After a long day of panels, she found a secluded outdoor spring, the crisp night air welcome contrast to the geothermally heated water. As she sank into the pool, letting the mineral-rich water envelop her, a wave of dizziness washed over her. The world tilted, the steam swirling before her eyes coalesced, shimmering, and then sharpened into an impossible image. It was Zhou Heng, not in a suit, but completely, shockingly naked, standing by the edge of a different, impossibly grand pool. Water streamed down his lean, muscled torso, and he was toweling his hair, his expression relaxed in a way she'd never seen. The vision was so vivid she could see the faint scar above his hip, the mole on his shoulder blade. Her head spun violently, the image fracturing like broken glass. She gasped, stumbling back against the rock wall of the spring, her heart hammering against her ribs. What was that? Disoriented and nauseous, she clambered out of the water, grabbing her robe. She had to get back to her room. Her vision swam, a stone path swaying beneath her feet. She stumbled, her knees buckling, and braced to impact with the ground. A strong hand clamped around her arm, steadying her. Careful, Lin Zwenong looked up, her vision clearing just enough to see the face of her bizarre hallucination. Now fully clothed in a dark casual shirt and trousers, it was Zhou Heng. He was real, and he was here. She stammered, pulling her robe tighter. His gaze was sharp, analytical. He looked from her pale face to her unsteady posture. A flicker of recognition crossed his features, not of her professional work, but of her hallway meltdown. Lin Zwenong, he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her arm. I remember you. The words hung in the air, a clear reference to her tirade, deepening the strange, unwelcome connection between them. Before she could process the weight of his statement, the world went black. She awoke to the unfamiliar scent of sandalwood and clean linen. Sunlight streamed through a gap in heavy blackout curtains, illuminating a sleek, minimalist hotel room that was definitely not her own. Panic flared in her chest as she sat up, realizing she was in a king-sized bed, wearing the hotel's plush white robe. Her own damp clothes were neatly folded on a chair nearby. Her mind raced, piecing together the night. The hot spring, the dizzy spell, the illusion. Joe hung the door to the suite opened, and he walked in, holding a tray with a glass of water and a small plate of pastries. He was dressed for the day, his demeanor as crisp and professional as ever. Seeing the fear in her eyes, he stopped several feet from the bed. "You fainted. The hotel staff couldn't identify your room, and your phone was locked," he explained, his tone even and matter-of-fact. He gestured around the empty suite. "Don't worry, I'm a man of principle. I had the front desk give me another room for the night. You've been perfectly safe." His explanation dispelled her worst fears, but replaced them with a fresh wave of awkwardness. She had passed out and been rescued by the man she'd eviscerated in a hallway, only to wake up in his presidential suite. She mumbled. The cool, sterile air of the distillery was Lin Zhuanong's sanctuary. Here, amidst the gleam of copper stills and the precise hum of machinery, the world simplified into science and art. The sweet, malty scent of fermenting grain was the only perfume she needed. For weeks, she had poured every waking hour into this project, a liquor she called snow liquor. It was her answer to Joe Heng's dismissive critique, her silent rebellion against the corporate skepticism that treated her passion as a mere production line. Each measurement was exact, every temperature change monitored with an obsessive focus. This wasn't just a job, it was a reclamation. She ran a hand over the cool glass of a beaker, her reflection wavering. The familiar aroma, usually a comfort, now carried a phantom bitterness, a ghost of memory. It was the same scent that had clung to her father's clothes, a sour prelude to slammed doors and her mother's silent tears. He had loved liquor, but his love was a destructive storm. Her mother had eventually fled that storm, leaving Zhuanong to navigate the wreckage. It was why she pursued perfection in her craft to control the very substance that had brought such chaos to her life. And it was why she built walls around her heart. Relationships, like her father's drinking, were an unpredictable variable she refused to entertain. Control was safety. The piercing ring of her doorbell shattered her focus. Wiping her hands on her apron, she opened the door to a sigh, so jarringly out of place it felt like a hallucination. Joe Heng stood there, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that seemed to mock her tiny, cluttered hallway. In his hands, he held not a briefcase or a file, but a thermal bag radiating a gentle warmth. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice flat. He bypassed the question, stepping inside as if he owned the place. "I brought breakfast, congee and yatia." He set the bag on her small kitchen counter, the savory scent of sesame oil and fried dough filling the air. "Consider it a fee for using your apartment as a sanctuary." Zhuanong folded her arms, suspicion hardening her features. Sanctuary from what? A crack appeared in his usual armor of arrogance. He loosened his tie, a flicker of something almost like exhaustion in his eyes. "My mother has arranged 3 blind dates for me today. I'd rather face a hostile takeover." The confession was so unexpectedly human that it disarmed her. For a moment, he wasn't the ruthless CEO who had belittled her work, but just a man hiding from his mother. A fragile truce settled between them as she reluctantly accepted a bowl of congee. They ate in a surprisingly comfortable silence, the chink of spoons against porcelain the only sound. "This snow liquor you're working on," he began, his tone shifting back toward business, but softer now. "What's the concept? What taste are you trying to capture?" Zhuanong hesitated, then decided to answer honestly. First love. Jo Heng raised an eyebrow. Intrigued. That's an abstract concept to bottle. It's not, she countered, her passion surfacing. It's a specific progression. It starts with a clean, almost startling sweetness, the shock of the initial feeling. Then, it mellows on the palate, warming you from the inside. The finish has to be crisp, almost fleeting, with just a trace of bitterness, a hint of regret. Because first love rarely lasts. She looked at him, her gaze direct, a challenge in her eyes. It's a beautiful, complicated memory, not a happily ever after. He studied her, his expression unreadable. And you, Lins went on, are you an expert on the subject? The walls went back up instantly. I'm an expert on liquor, she stated coolly, placing her empty bowl in the sink. I don't do relationships, Mr. Joe. They're a distraction, and frankly, a poor investment. She was unaware of the way his gaze lingered on her, a flicker of disappointment mixing with a newfound resolve. Days later, the sterile chill of the main conference room felt suffocating. Lins Wenong stood at the back of the room, a silent observer as the executive team gathered around the long, polished table, her heart hammered against her ribs. Today was the preliminary presentation for Snow Liquor. Director Ma, a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes, stood at the head of the table, a prototype bottle displayed proudly before him, the projector screen lit up with slides she had never seen. After extensive research and development, he began, his voice slick with self-importance. My team and I have perfected a new product we believe will capture the youth market, a spirit we are calling First Snow. He gestured vaguely in her direction. Miss Lin was instrumental in the basic distillation, of course, but the flavor profile and conceptual branding were a significant collaborative effort, which I personally oversaw. The lie was so blatant it stole her breath. He was taking her work, her story, her soul, and passing it off as his own. She saw her late nights, her meticulous notes, her entire creative process being erased in his smooth, corporate speech. That's not, she started, her voice barely a whisper, but it was enough to draw attention. Director Ma's smile tightened. He cut her off with a paternalistic chuckle. Miss Lin is very modest about her contributions, a valuable trait in a junior distiller. He turned back to the board, effectively silencing her. Humiliation burned hot in her cheeks. She was invisible from his seat at the head of the table. Jo Heng had been silent, his fingers steepled, his face a mask of stone. He watched Director Ma's performance, his gaze sharp and analytical. He saw Swenong's clenched fists, the desperate flicker in her eyes. He had seen her dedication firsthand. Just as Director Ma was about to pour a sample, Jo Heng spoke. His voice was quiet, yet it sliced through the room with absolute authority. Director Ma, that's enough. The entire room froze. Director Ma's hand trembled slightly, the bottleneck clinking against her glass. CEO Joe, is there a problem? Jo Heng didn't look at him. His eyes, cold and intense, locked onto Lin's Wenong across the room. The air crackled with a tension so thick it felt hard to breathe. Everyone waited for him to defend her, to expose the fraud. Instead, he delivered the final, crushing blow. Lin's Wenong, he declared, his voice devoid of all emotion. You're fired. The words echoed in the stunned silence. A collective gasp rippled through the executives. Lin's Wenong felt the floor drop out from beneath her. It was a public execution, betrayed by her superior, and now publicly humiliated by the one man she was just beginning to see as something more. As the initial shock gave way to a wave of cold despair, she met his gaze one last time. His face was unyielding, but for a split second, his eyes held a look that wasn't of malice or dismissal, but of something far more complex and calculating. It was a silent, cryptic message she couldn't decipher, a final, bewildering twist of the knife before her world went dark. The distant, whimsical music of a carousel drifted on the breeze, a cheerful counterpoint to the tension tightening Lin Zhuanong's shoulders. She stood beside Zhou Heng, bewildered, at the edge of a bustling amusement park. Families laughed, children shrieked with delight, and the air smelled of popcorn and sugar. It was the last place on earth she expected him to bring her after the corporate warfare of the past week. "Why are we here?" she asked, her voice flat. Zhou Heng didn't answer immediately. He simply inclined his head towards a nearby set of swings. "Look," Zhuanong followed his gaze, her eyes narrowing. "There." Pushing a small girl with bright pink ribbons in her hair was Director Ma. He wasn't the conniving executive who had tried to steal her formula, but a father, his face alight with a gentle, unguarded love she'd never seen. The little girl's giggles were unrestrained. "To your joy? His daughter has congenital heart disease," Zhou Heng said, his voice slow and devoid of its usual arrogance. "The surgery costs a fortune. His wife left years ago. He's all she has." He paused, letting the reality sink in. He was desperate. What he did was wrong, but his reasons, they weren't born from pure malice. He saw an opportunity and gambled everything on it for her. A wave of understanding washed over Zhuanong, so powerful it almost buckled her knees. It clicked into place with sickening clarity: the public dismissal, the shareholder pressure, his cold indifference. It had all been a performance. He hadn't fired her to punish her. He had cornered her, forced her into a position where her only option was to stand up and fight for her work. It was a test, a brutal and calculated trial by fire designed to see if she had the conviction to own her creation. He had given her the stage to speak her truth. Back in the sterile confines of the R&D department an hour later, the atmosphere was electric. Zhou Heng stood before the assembled team, his presence commanding the room. "Effective immediately, Lin Zhuanong is reinstated to her position as lead distiller," he announced, his voice ringing with authority. "Her department will receive full credit and the corresponding bonus for the successful development of snow liquor." A murmur of relief and surprise rippled through the staff. As for Director Ma, Zhou Heng continued, "He has been transferred to the logistics department in Qingdao, a position with less pressure and a comprehensive family health plan. He will repay the company for his breach of conduct over time." It was a masterful solution: justice without cruelty, accountability without destruction. As the team began to celebrate, Zhou Heng caught Zhuanong's eye. She started to leave with the others, but his quiet voice stopped her. "Zhuanong," she turned, her heart thumping a nervous rhythm against her ribs. He closed the distance between them until only a foot of air separated them. The calculated CEO was gone, replaced by the man who had stood beside her at the park. "Just one thing," he said, his gaze intense, pinning her in place. "Don't avoid me again." It wasn't a request. It was a plea wrapped in a command, a clear and undeniable signal that his interest in her was anything but professional. Weeks later, Zhuanong found herself paying the price for Snow Liquor's explosive success. The marketing department, eager to capitalize on the public's fascination with the Cinderella distiller, had brokered a promotional deal. She was now contractually obligated to be one half of a fake celebrity couple with Ice, a popular but vapid influencer, to endorse the brand. The photo shoot was a nightmare of flashing lights and forced intimacy. Dressed in elegant, uncomfortable clothes, Zhuanong had to stand close to Ice, her entire body rigid with discomfort as he draped a lazy arm around her. "Can you at least try to look like you like him?" the photographer called out, exasperated. She should be grateful. A sneering voice cut in from the sidelines. It was Songbo, ICE's agent, and, as Zhuanong had recently learned, Gu Yu's spiteful ex-boyfriend. He looked her up and down with open disdain. A factory girl from nowhere, getting a taste of the good life. Don't get too used to it. Once this campaign is over, It's back to the vouts for you. Swanong's jaw tightened, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. She fixed a placid, unreadable smile on her face and stared into the camera lens. That's enough, Songbo. The voice that cut through the studio was like a whip crack, cold and lethal. Every head turned. Zhou Heng stood at the entrance, his face a mask of thunder. He strode onto the set, his expensive suit seeming to suck all the light and air out of the room. He ignored everyone, his eyes locked on Swanong. He gently took her arm, pulling her away from ice as if touching a piece of priceless porcelain that had been carelessly handled. He fixed his glare on the stunned agent. Lin Swanong is the soul of snow liquor, he stated, his voice dangerously low. Without her, this brand is nothing. You would do well to remember who you're speaking to. Songbo paled, stammering an apology, while Ice looked on with mild, bovine confusion. But Zhou Heng wasn't finished. He turned back to Swanong, his expression softening from fury to something raw and vulnerable that stunned her more than his anger. The entire crew watched, frozen in silence. He reached out, his thumb gently brushing her cheek. I love you, he said, his voice clear and unwavering, loud enough for everyone to hear. The words echoed in the cavernous studio. I don't care about your past, your principles, or whatever walls you've built. I love you no matter what condition you have. The shock was a physical blow. Swanong's breath hitched. His public declaration, this stripping away of all pretense, was too much. It was a siege on the fortress she had so carefully constructed around her heart. Her ingrained defenses slammed shut. She took a step back, pulling her arm from his grasp. The warmth of his touch vanished, replaced by a familiar, protective cold. CEO Zhou, she said, her voice steady but brittle. The sterile scent of antiseptic that had once defined Lin Swanong's trauma now smelled like a second chance. She sat by her father's hospital bed, watching the slow, steady drip of the fall. Zhou Heng had arranged everything: the private room, the top specialists, the comprehensive detox program. He had moved with a silent, swift efficiency that left her breathless. Her father, his hands no longer trembling, reached for hers. His eyes, clear for the first time in years, were filled with a profound, aching remorse. Swanong, he rasped, his voice thick with unshed tears. I'm done. Few I'll quit. I promise. The words she had longed to hear her entire life finally came, not as a desperate plea during a drunken stupor, but as a solemn vow in the quiet light of dawn. A weight she hadn't realized was crushing her spine simply lifted. She squeezed his hand, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the beginning of peace. Later, nursing a cup of tea with Guyu, she felt untethered. He solved a problem I've carried since I was a child, and he did it without even asking, she murmured, staring into the swirling liquid. He's arrogant, infuriating, and he sees through me like I'm glass. Guyu stirred her own coffee, her expression knowing. And I think I might be falling for him. Lin Swanong confessed, the words tasting foreign and dangerous. But my principles, Guyu, I promised myself I would rely on no one, that I would build my life with my own two hands, beholden to nothing but my craft. Principles are meant to protect you, Swanong, not imprison you. Guyu said gently, this isn't about reliance. It's about partnership. You're scared of losing control, of being vulnerable. But maybe, just maybe, happiness lies on the other side of that fear. Just try to date him. See what happens when you let someone in. The opportunity to test that theory came sooner than she expected. At Jing Group's annual gala, an event celebrating the company's artisans, Lin Swanong stood awkwardly near the champagne fountain, a celebrated distiller feeling like an imposter among corporate sharks. Zhou Heng, impossibly handsome in a tailored tuxedo, took the stage, the room quieted. He spoke briefly about Jing's commitment to tradition and innovation before his gaze swept the room, landing directly on her. The air crackled. It felt as if a spotlight had singled her out, pinning her in place. "And while we celebrate our collective future," he said, his voice resonating through the microphone, deep and certain, "I also want to acknowledge my personal future." He smiled, a rare, genuine curve of his lips that was aimed only at her. "Lin Zwenong is the one I want to marry." A collective gasp rippled through the hall, whispers erupted. Cameras flashed in her direction, blinding her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. It was audacious, coercive, and utterly, terrifyingly romantic. He was pushing her off the cliff she'd been standing on, forcing her to see if she could fly. After the ensuing chaos died down, he found her in a quiet corner of the terrace. He wasn't smug or arrogant, just earnest. "I know that was a lot," he said softly, "but I'm done playing games. I need you to know how serious I am. Come to my home. Have supper with me. Let me explain everything." Her principles screamed no. Her heart whispered yes. Looking into his unwavering eyes, she found her voice. Okay. His home wasn't the cold, minimalist palace she'd imagined. It was a warm, elegant house filled with art and books, smelling faintly of sandalwood and old paper. But the real shock came when the front door opened to reveal two smiling faces she recognized with a jolt. The playful, eccentric JJ duo, the couple who had pranked her with a fake competition and then mentored her with startling insight, stood there, beaming. "You." Lin Zwenong breathed, pointing a finger before catching herself. "Welcome, dear," the woman said, her eyes twinkling. "I'm Jinxie. And this is my husband, Jianan. It's so good to see you again." Zhao Heng stepped forward, placing a hand on Lin Zwenong's arm. "Zwenong, these are my parents." The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. JJ, Jinxie, and Jianan. The names clicked into place. The legendary, almost mythical founders of Jing Group. They had been in her workshop. They had tasted her liquor. They had orchestrated her meeting with "My name isn't just Zhao Heng," he said, finally closing the last gap in the puzzle. He looked at Jinxie, his mother, the woman Lin Zwenong had known as the enigmatic Ms. Emiao. "It's he Zhao Heng." Her mind raced, connecting a constellation of disparate points into a single, blindingly bright picture. His intimate knowledge of Jing, his immediate access to resources, his seemingly random appearance in her life. It was all a lie. It was all the truth. "The sibling prank?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, recalling the beautiful woman he'd claimed was his sister. "Yi Zhao Heng had the grace to look sheepish, my cousin. We thought I was afraid you'd run if you knew who I was from the start. I just wanted you to see me, the man, not the name. It was a foolish, roundabout way to get close, to see if you could care for the person, not the position." Lin Zwenong looked from his earnest face to the kind, smiling faces of his parents. The deceptions, the half-truths, the relentless pursuit. It wasn't a game of power. It was a carefully, if clumsily, constructed courtship. He hadn't tried to buy her or own her. He had tried to win her. He had tended to her deepest wound, championed her talent, and publicly declared his intentions to the world. In that moment, the principles she had clung to for years felt like nothing more than flimsy shields, brittle and useless. They hadn't protected her from hurt. They had only kept her from love. Looking at Yi Zhao Heng, she finally understood. He wasn't a threat to her independence. He was its partner. A profound sense of peace settled over her. Quiet and complete. The illusion was gone, and the reality was more beautiful than any fairy tale she could have imagined. The scent of rain-washed earth and blooming gardenias was the first thing that broke through her confusion. One moment, Lin Zwenong was leaving her distillery, locking the heavy oak door behind her. The next, a sleek black car had pulled silently to the curb. Two men in sharp, Dark suits had stepped out, their expressions unreadable but their movements precise. Before she could protest, she was gently but firmly guided into the plush leather interior, a soft silk blindfold placed over her eyes. Panic, cold and sharp, had tried to claw its way up her throat, but a familiar, subtle fragrance clung to the silk sandalwood and bergamot, the scent that was uniquely his. The panic subsided, replaced by a wave of bewildered exasperation. This had Joe Heng's brand of maddening, high-handed drama written all over it. Now, as the car glided to a halt, the door opened and a hand, warm and strong, found hers. She didn't need to see him to know. It was the same hand that had steadied her when she'd nearly stumbled, the same hand that had brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, the same hand that had held hers tightly when a rival's betrayal had almost shattered her dreams. She allowed him to lead her out, the soft grass of a manicured lawn yielding beneath her feet. Joe Heng, if this is another one of your elaborate schemes to get me to sign a distribution deal, you've officially lost your mind, she said, her voice tight with a mixture of annoyance and undeniable curiosity. His only reply was a low chuckle, a sound that vibrated with an emotion she couldn't quite place. He led her a few more steps forward before stopping. The air grew still, thick with anticipation. With infinite gentleness, he reached up and untied the blindfold. Her world exploded in a soft-focused dream of white and gold. She was standing at the entrance of a glass conservatory, its crystalline walls thrown open to the twilight sky. A pathway paved with luminous white stones stretched before her, flanked by an ocean of white roses, their petals still jeweled with evening dew. Fairy lights were strung through the branches of ancient, weeping willows, casting a warm, ethereal glow that made the entire scene feel like a mirage. In the distance, a string quartet played a melody so soft and tender it felt like a heartbeat. And out of the path, standing before a breathtaking archway woven from roses and starlight, was Joe Heng. He had shed his corporate armor. Gone was the impeccably tailored suit of the ruthless CEO. In its place, he wore a simple, elegant white tuxedo that softened the sharp lines of his face, making him look younger, more vulnerable. But it was the look in his eyes, a raw, unguarded intensity that stripped away every layer of his arrogance that made her breath catch in her throat. "You're right," he began, his voice quiet but carrying in the hush there. "It is a scheme, but not for business." He walked toward her, closing the distance between them until he was close enough for her to see the nervous pulse beating at the base of his throat. "Swanong, when I first met you, I thought you were a nuisance, an obstacle. You were stubborn, infuriatingly principled, and you looked at me as if I was something you'd found on the bottom of your shoe." A small, involuntary smile touched her lips. That sounded about right. But then, he continued, his gaze unwavering, "I saw you work. I saw the fire in your eyes when you spoke about the art of distilling, the way you could coax poetry from grain and water. I saw you stand up to people who tried to tear you down. And I saw you cry when you thought no one was looking. I saw every wall you built to keep the world out. And all I wanted to do was find a way inside." He took her hands in his, their warmth a grounding force in the dizzying beauty of the moment. "People know me as Joe Heng, the head of the Joe conglomerate. A name, a title, a machine built for profit. But that's not who I want to be with you." His grip tightened, a silent plea. "With you, I just want to be Joe Heng, the man who fell in love with the distiller who smells of osmanthus and determination. The man who would trade his entire empire for one more day of watching you chase your dreams." He sank to one knee on the cool stone path. From his pocket, he produced a small, velvet box. He opened it, revealing a ring with a diamond so clear it seemed to hold the light of every star in the sky. "The ghosts of your past, the walls around your heart, let me help you fight them. Let me be your partner, your defender, your home. I promise to spend the rest of my life proving that you can trust me, that you can be safe with me, that you can love me without fear. His voice cracked with emotion, the last vestiges of his pride washed away by a tide of pure love. Lin's Wenong. Will you marry me? Tears she hadn't realized she was holding back began to fall, hot and silent. The illusion of him she had clung to for so long, the arrogant, overbearing CEO, shattered completely, leaving only the man before her. The man who had seen her at her worst and believed in her best. The man who had relentlessly, patiently, and unconditionally loved her until her own fractured heart had dared to love him back. The walls she had built so carefully, brick by painful brick, didn't just crumble, they evaporated. In their place was a vast, open space filled with a light and warmth she had long forgotten was possible. Yes, she whispered, the word a fragile puff of air. She cleared her throat, laughing through her tears as she found her voice. Yes, Yi Zhou-heng, 1,000 times. Yes. He surged to his feet, sliding the ring onto her finger where it fit as if it were forged for her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, lifting her off the ground and spinning her in a circle as applause erupted from the shadows. She saw them, then her father, his eyes glistening with pride, her few trusted friends from the distillery, his own small circle of loyal confidants. They were all there, their faces beaming. Time seemed to blur, a seamless transition from a private promise to a public vow. She found herself standing before that same floral archway, her hand tucked securely in his. Her father had walked her down the aisle, his quiet strength a comforting presence, before placing her hand in Zhou-heng's. Their vows were not just words, they were a testament to their journey. He promised to be her unwavering anchor in any storm. She promised to be the home he could always return to. When he slid the simple gold wedding band onto her finger, next to the brilliant diamond, it felt more real than anything she had ever known. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and as he leaned in to kiss her, the world fell away, leaving only the soft pressure of his lips and the certain knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Later, at the reception held within the conservatory, they stood before a magnificent, multi-tiered cake adorned with delicate, sugar-spun osmanthus flowers. Their hands, now both adorned with matching rings, overlapped on the silver knife. To our beginning, he murmured, his breath warm against her ear, his eyes sparkling with a joy so profound it seemed to light him from within. She looked at him, at the man who had crashed into her life and rearranged her soul, and her heart swelled with a love so fierce and complete it was almost overwhelming. To our forever, she replied, her voice steady and sure. Together, they made the first cut, a simple act that sealed their shared future. In the warm glow of their new life, surrounded by the scent of roses and the sound of laughter, the past was a whisper and the future was a promise, held securely in each other's hands.